story by H.C. Andersen. Read by Byron Seidel. In the garden, all the apple trees are blooming. They had been in such hurry to flower that they didn't have a green leaf yet. In the yard, the little ducklings were waddling around, and in a corner sat the cat and licked his paws. The fields of grain were green, and everywhere the sound of birds singing could be heard. Judging from their jubilant song, the day must have been a high holiday, and this was not altogether wrong, for it was Sunday. The bells in the church pealed, and happy people dressed in their best clothes were on their way to church. The whole scene was one of joy and gaiety, and truly, on a spring day as beautiful as that day was, one could say, "How good and kind God is to man." But inside the church, the minister stood in the pulpit, preaching loudly and angrily about the impious and ungrateful behavior of men. He said that God would punish them. All men who had been evil would burn forever in the flames of hell. Their suffering would never end. Eternal fires would roast them. It was horrible to listen to, and he spoke so well, so convincingly. He described hell as a stinking cave where all the putrid waste of man was gathered. There no breezes blew to spread, even for a moment, the misty steam of sulfur. Endless, bottomless was the pit, and the condemned sank slowly down through this mire in eternal silence. It was terrible to hear, but what made it worse was that the minister spoke from his heart. The whole congregation was frightened and horrified, although outside the birds were still singing happily as before, and the sun was shining. Each of the little flowers was preaching a sermon, and every one was different from the ministers. They said, "God is good and kind toward us all." Later that evening, just before bedtime, the minister noticed that his wife looked very sad. She was sitting in a chair, staring thoughtfully down at her hands. "What ails you?" he asked. "What ails me?" repeated his wife, and smiled forlornly. "I cannot understand your sermon. That is what is the matter with me. No matter how much I add and subtract, I do not get the same sum as you do. You said that evil men, the sinners, would burn in hell eternally. How terribly, terribly long that is. I am only a poor, sinful human being, and yet I could not bear to think that even the worst sinner in the whole world should burn eternally. How then do you think that God could bear it? He that is infinitely good and knows how we are tempted by evil, both from inside ourselves and from the world. I cannot imagine it, even though you have told me that it is true." It was fall. The leaves had fallen from the trees. The minister sat by a dying woman's bed. She was his wife. "If anyone deserved God's grace, it is you, and peacefully you shall sleep in your grave," he mumbled. The woman died, and he closed her eyes and folded her hands as though in prayer. Then she sang a psalm and prayed. She was carried to her grave, and 2 tears ran down the cheeks of the earnest rector. His home was silent and still. There was no sunshine there, for she whom he loved had died. It was the middle of the night. A whiff of cold air blew across the minister's face and woke him. It was as if the room were filled with moonshine, but the moon was not yet up. A spectre stood by his bed, the ghost of his wife. She looked so sorrowfully at him. The minister felt that she wanted to ask him something. He sat up in bed and stretched his arms out toward her. "Have you not found peace in your grave? Do you suffer? You, the most pious, the best of all women." The spectre bent her head to answer, "Yes," and placed her hand upon her breast. "Can I help you obtain peace?" whispered the minister. "Yes," answered this poor wife. "But how?" "Get me a hair, just one hair, from the head of a sinner who will burn eternally in hell," pleaded the ghost. "Yes, so easy. It must be to release you from your pain. You who were so good," exclaimed the minister. "Then follow me," commanded the ghost, "for it has been granted you that you can fly as swiftly as your thoughts to wherever you desire to go. I shall accompany you. But before the cock crows, you must have found one man who is by God condemned to the eternal fires." Quickly carried by thought, they were in a big city. On the walls of the houses, written in fiery letters, were the deadly sins: pride, miserliness, gluttony, the whole 7-colored rainbow of man's mortal sins. "In there, yes, in there. Oh, if I were only sure," mumbled the minister. The minister, as they stood outside the great portals of a rich man's house, broad stairs led up to the great ballroom, and the sound of dance music could be heard all the way down in the street. A servant in the livery, carrying a cane, with a gold knob on its end, barred at the entrance to those who were not invited. "Our ball is as elegant as the king's," he said, as he looked at the mob that had gathered outside, and on his face contempt and arrogance were plainly written. "Pride," whispered the ghost. "Look at him." "Him?" The rector shook his head. "He is only a fool, a clown. He will not be punished in the eternal fires." "Only a fool." His words echoed through the house of Pride, and the title fitted everyone there. They flew through the bare rooms of the miser, where an old man lay, freezing and hungry, on a rickety bed. So miserable, and yet his thoughts clung to his gold. They saw him rise and throw off his threadbare covering. With feverish, trembling hands, he removed a stone in the wall, and from the hole there he took out a stocking filled with gold coins. That was its hiding place. His cold hands shook as he counted and recounted every coin. "He is sick. It is insanity, hopeless, meaningless insanity. What fears, what evil dreams must he not experience?" They fled, and soon they stood in the large cell of a prison, where the criminals slept, side by side, on their plank beds. Like a wild animal, one of them screamed in his sleep. Then he awoke, and with his elbow tried to wake his neighbor. The only man turned while he mumbled angrily, "Shut up, you ox, and sleep. You wake me every night." "Every night," repeated the man who had screamed. "Yes, every night I hear it howl, and it comes to try to strangle me. My evil temper has led me to do wrong, and twice before have I been inside these walls, but have I not been punished? One crime, though, I have never confessed. It happened on the day when I was released from prison last. As I came past my master's house, I remembered an old insult, and anger boiled within me. I took a match and struck it against the wall and set the thatched roof on fire. The house burned, for the fire had a temper like mine. I helped save the furniture and got the horses out. No living thing, man or beast, lost their lives, except for some pigeons and the old dog who was chained. I forgot him. One could hear him howl amid the flames. That howling cur I still hear every time I want to sleep. And if I finally close my eyes, then the dog comes, big and furry, and lies down upon my chest until I suffocate. Listen to me, you who sleep all night while I only rest for minutes. Listen! In fury, the man threw himself upon his comrade, who had turned his back on him, and hit his face as hard as he could. Angry Lars has gone mad again, shouted the other criminals as they jumped out of bed and threw themselves upon the ferocious man. They wrestled with him and forced his head down between his legs. And in that position, they tied him up. His eyes were bloodshot, and he could hardly breathe. "You will kill him," shouted the miser. "Poor unfortunate." And he stretched out his arm to protect the poor sinner who suffered so. As the night passed, they flew through the halls of the rich and the hovels of the poor. Envy, greed, lust, all the mortal sins they saw, and an angel read out both the men's crimes and what could be said in their defense. Often that was not much, but God, who can read our hearts and knows all, He knows too of all the evil that tempts us, both from within and without. He is all mercy, all love. The minister's hand shook. He did not dare raise it to tear a hair from the head of a sinner. He cried, and tears are the waters of grace and love, and they shall put out hell's fires. Then the cock crowed. "Have pity, God," the minister begged, "and give her peace in her grave, that I could not bring her." "Oh, but you have," said the ghost of his wife, "for it was your hard words, your dark and severe human judgment over God and His creation, that made me come tonight. Learn to know your fellow men, for even in the most evil of them there is a goodly part, which will at last come victorious and quench the fires of hell." Someone pressed a kiss on the minister's mouth. He opened his eyes. The sun was shining into the room. There stood his wife, alive and smiling at him. He had just awakened from a dream that God had sent him. A story by Hans Christian Andersen, narrated by Byron Seidel.